All right. Joshua chapter 8. Can you believe it's September 1st? I can't believe that after this morning I have 3 lessons left here and I'm on Joshua chapter 8. That means that some replanning is going to be necessary. But, Drew and I had talked about this study, and there are some chapters that we'll get to later on that, let's just say, they're easily skipped or condensed, and we'll do some of that, and we will try to make the best use of our next 3 weeks, because the 4th week of the month, I guess that's the 5th week of the month since today's the 1st. So the 5th of the month will be our first Victory Sunday, 3rd Victory Sunday of the year, and our Friends and Family Day for the year. Brandon Renfro will be with us, and so make sure that you circle that date on your calendar to definitely be here and have your friends and family with you. We'll have a great day together. I'm thankful to Drew for teaching for me last week. I didn't mean for him to be in here this morning because I want to brag on him for a second, but I'm just going to go behind the curtain for just a second and tell you what happened last Friday and Saturday. So, like Friday night into Saturday morning, my neck and arm just went haywire, and so I finally figured out probably by about lunchtime on Saturday that Sunday was not going to happen. And so I texted Drew, said, "Can you teach Joshua chapter 7 for me?" He said, "No problem." He was in Chattanooga, came back to the fall barbecue, probably went home and slept. Absolutely had no time for any preparation on that at all. And then I watched it last week, and just like you were here, and it was a fantastic lesson. Looked like I told him a month ago that I needed him to teach Joshua chapter 7. I am amazed and blessed by the kind of Bible student that he is, that he can come in and do that. The bad news is filet mignon is over. We're back to pork and beans. So let's get into this morning's study of Joshua chapter 8. It really is a companion study to what Drew talked about last Sunday, because in Joshua chapter 7, we learned about the defeat at Ai, the discovery of Achan's sin, and then the punishment delivered to Achan and his family. And we learned from that passage of Scripture that God cares for Israel as long as they obey Him. But when they reject Him, He's going to allow them to be defeated. Paul described God to the Romans in Romans 11:22, and it sort of goes right along these lines. He said, "Consider therefore the kindness and sternness of God, sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in His kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off." It's that same kind of idea. Follow God, and you will receive His blessings. Now, at this point in time, in the conquering of Canaan, that was a very immediate thing. And Drew spoke last week about the things that didn't happen. There was sin in the camp, but there were some other problems as well. And following that victory, that resounding victory in Jericho, there became to be obviously a little bit of a puffed up feeling that look at what we did. And as we began that study in Joshua chapter 7, those spies came back and said, "Don't send everybody up there to Ai. That's not necessary. Just send a small group. We can take care of this." And it was sort of the we that was the problem, right? It was, trying to think about doing this without God. It's now we're tough, we're battle tested, we can go and conquer. And that was not the case at all. And so they were soundly defeated. We have to think about, and it was part of last week's study, after the defeat at Ai, how do the children of Israel feel? How are they dealing with that? Because we've built this whole study up to this point on these victories that were given by God. We talked for quite a while about the entry into Canaan, about being able to cross the Jordan River and how important that was, for that that great miracle to occur. And we talked about how, God showed through the Ark of the Covenant passing across the Jordan and being there on the dry ground in Jordan as they went across, the presence of God and the victory that comes through God. And then we talked about how at the first military conquest across the Jordan in Jericho, how important it was to see the victory that God delivered and for the people to be encouraged and built up. We can do this. And how all the people were behind Joshua all the way. And you remember we talked about how the people encouraged Joshua as Joshua encouraged the people. And all this stuff was building up so positively, everything in the right direction. And now defeat occurs. And we know the reason that defeat occurs, but now what do the people think? Is there the feeling that, why has God brought us to this place and now we're going to be defeated, and where do we go from here? And so they are in sort of a precarious situation. There's some wording that, as I've studied through this, I found pretty interesting. In last week's passage, in chapter 7, verse 6. Is that the right verse? Maybe that's not the one. Where's the one that says their heart melts? Verse 5. This print's too small. Verse 5. And the men of Ai killed about 36 of their men and chased them before the gate as far as Shibarim and struck them at the descent, and the hearts of the people melted and became as water. Now I've got a question for you. Where have you heard that verbiage before about hearts melting? In our study so far. Chapter 2, Rahab, right? So chapter 2, go back to chapter 2. Let's back up. Chapter 2, verses 10 and 11. Verses 10 and 11. For we've heard how, this is Rahab speaking, for we heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. This attitude, the tables have turned. And so you remember how encouraged Joshua and the people were when they heard basically that the people of Jericho and the people of Canaan, their hearts melted. They were defeated already. And so now we get to chapter 7, verse 6, and we hear those same kind of words, but the hearts that are melting are the children of Israel. And so, now they have a lack of being sure about this. They don't know what's next, what's going to become of the situation. And so these upcoming activities that we're going to study today are very important and very critical to the continuance of the conquest of Canaan. So, we know most of all that God had not forsaken Israel, that Israel had forsaken God. So Achan took those secretly forbidden items from Jericho, and he broke an important command that God had given them. You remember when we studied about the conquest of Jericho, that again, in that whole idea that the victory in Jericho was delivered solely by God. You remember the method, marching around the city for the walls to fall. This victory came directly from God. It was not the power of the people. And another way that was reinforced was the fact that everything from the city was to be dedicated to the Lord. And that gets into the whole problem that Achan had. And we're going to get into today's lesson and focus on the fact that God never wanted anyone to be impoverished. This was to make a very important point, that the delivery of Jericho came from God. It was on God's behalf, and the spoils from this victory, to reinforce that, were going to be dedicated to the Lord. Now, that was not going to always be the case. It's not going to be the case when we go back into Ai. But that was very important, and so it was so important when Achan violated this that the result in the way that the Lord allowed Ai to defeat them, and then also in the resulting situation you studied about last week where Achan and his family was punished, all of that was necessary. Okay, so that's a lot of talk about chapter 7. You may ask, what about chapter 8? So let's talk about that. So chapter 8, verse 1, the Lord is now going to promise to deliver Ai. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land." So we get right back into the kinds of things that we've heard God tell Joshua before. These kind of words that the battle is over. Just go follow my plan. The victory is yours already. Those are the words. So, we're turning right back to the way that that God has taught to Joshua as we've gone through this study. Joshua had no reason to doubt whether Israel would defeat his enemies, and now the Lord is fighting again for his people. Now, one of the first things that we see that's interesting here is the original plan that the spies, that we'll call them that came back from Ai, their idea was, let's just send up a small group. Well, God's going to say, no, that's not my plan. My plan is we're sending everyone. And I think, once again, as they sort of right the ship here and make right this conquest of Ai that failed the last time, there's probably a great level of importance that the whole nation be involved with this, that the victory that's delivered, that they're all a part of it, even though they realize that it was granted by God. Because now we're all back together, we're all on the right track to continue on with the conquest of Canaan. As God had done with Jericho, he sets the battle plan for Ai. And so this battle plan is going to be different. It's not going to be a straightforward assault with the entire force. But in verse 2, he tells him to set an ambush behind the city. And so, Patrick, if you can, if this is turned on, I forgot to thank you for doing that. I may just tell you to flip to the next slide in a minute. But this is the map of Canaan. And go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll just magnify in just a little bit. Thank you. All right, so here you see, the things that we've been talking about this time. You remember we had the whole discussion about the Jordan that runs from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, and the crossing of the Jordan, and how that happened very close to Jericho. Hopefully you can see that right up above the Dead Sea. Thanks. There's Jericho. And so there's the conquest of Jericho, and then there, just to the west, northwest there, is Ai. And so you see Ai and you see Bethel, and both of those will come into play in the battle that's going to occur today. And so if you think about the fact that they moved from Jericho to Ai, they're sort of making their way to begin to take Canaan. And so the battle plan, I think it's very important in verse 2 that we see that this plan to lay an ambush behind the city were the words that came from God. And so he didn't just say, go take the city. He gave them the plan as well. I think it's very important here to see this wasn't just Joshua being a military genius, so that once again they could say, we did this because we're smart and we're mighty and we're greater than these people. But God delivered the battle plan so that everything about this was once again going to be God. And so now they need to see, if we do what God says and we follow God's plan, we're successful. As soon as we start doing our own thing, we're unsuccessful. It's pretty straightforward, right? So our outline for chapter 8, verses 3 through 13, we're going to talk about the strategy that's set. Then we'll talk about the attack in verses 14 through 21, and then finally the victory in verses 22 through 25. So, the strategy set. The Lord instructed Joshua to ambush the city of Ai, and Joshua didn't hesitate to put that plan into motion. Now, verse 3 says Joshua chose 30,000 of his mighty men of valor, and he sent them out by night. And we presume that that would be so that they wouldn't be noticed. And then Joshua gave them the following commands in verses 3 through 7. Let's read those together. Behold, you shall lie in ambush against the city, behind it. Don't go very far from the city, but all of you remain ready. And I and all the people who are with me will approach the city. When they come out against us, just as before, we shall flee before them. And they will come out after us until we've drawn them away from the city. For they will say, they are fleeing from us just as before. Let me find the rest of my notes here. So we will flee before them. Then you shall rise up from the ambush and seize the city, for the Lord your God will give it into your hand. So it's clever. It's a clever, bright military approach. And in fact, it even uses the fact that they were just defeated to their own benefit. So why do I say that? So the Lord tells Joshua, you take these folks and you set up an ambush behind the city. So for right now, just for this, and I may not be exactly right, but let's assume that he sends those 30,000 mighty men of valor, and he sort of sends them around, and they get on the west side of Ai. And then he says, all right, Joshua, so you have the 30,000 men on the other side of Ai. So he says, all right, now, charge. And so here comes the whole host. And that, remember, how many people we're talking about when we're talking about the children of Israel? Hundreds of thousands of soldiers. So if you're missing 30,000, can't tell that, right? In a midst of hundreds of thousands. So they start the charge. So they start the charge straight into Ai. Here we come. You can see us, right? And so what happens with the soldiers of Ai? Well, the soldiers of Ai have been, hey, we beat you once, we'll beat you again. And so they come out and start charging toward the army of Joshua. All right, so then what does Joshua do? The Lord tells him, you turn around and run in the other direction, which again fits with the fact of, well, maybe they're scared of us, right? For the people of Ai, for the soldiers of Ai, we've got them on the run. And so they chase them in the opposite direction until everybody's out of town. Then the 30,000 men of valor who are on the other side of town stroll into town and set it on fire. Once that's done, they continue on out of town, and the folks of Ai are sandwiched. That's a good plan. I mean, that's a military movie right there if I've ever seen one, right? That's great. And so, but it was, do you see how important now it was that it was very clear that this was the plan from God? Because this could have just been a good plan for a military attack. And so they needed to know clearly that the wisdom of this plan and of what God had in store for the whole situation, it was God's doing. It was not their doing. Yeah. And I think that was, yeah. And that's exactly why I believe that God set this up so that the soldiers of Ai, they all charged out of town. they went straight toward Joshua. So this was all set up for the armies of Joshua. They charge in. Then when the soldiers of Ai start coming out, they turn around and run back in the opposite direction and basically just draw everybody from Ai out of town. And so, I mean, he did. He used the fact, all of that, so the sort of the fearlessness of the soldiers of Ai, the fact that Joshua and the armies of the Lord appear to be scared, and so they retreat and run back in the other direction, all of that was built right off the fact that earlier defeat had occurred. And so it's exactly, it's how all of this plan makes logical and tactical sense to us, but that's really not the most important thing of all. The most important thing is that the instructions came from the Lord and they followed those instructions. Any other comments before we sort of move on a little bit? That's right. Right. It just made the whole thing, much easier. And then once that was done, when you have someone that's cornered and fighting on both sides, they didn't have much of a chance. So it was a masterful plan. So Israel's success depended on their submission to God's will. And in this whole situation, they're learning more about what it means to be covenant people. The covenant means more than just accepting the promises of God to multiply the nation and extend the power throughout Canaan. It means more than just following circumcision and yearly festivals. Being people of God, what they were trying to understand here is that there were certain obligations that were set down by God. And this means becoming covenant people of God means that they were adopting the lifestyle that was ordered by God, taking each decision in the light of God's leadership, not in the light of personal self-confidence. They got overconfident. Drew talked about this last week. They got overconfident. They began to believe in themselves. I kept trying to remember this. There's some old saying that I couldn't remember. It had something to do with it's like the guy who woke up on third base and thought he hit a triple or something like that. There's some kind of saying like that of a person who is put in a great situation, not of his own doing or her own doing, and then believes that it had, that they start convincing them that it had to do with themselves. And so, when you think about the situation in Canaan, and the fact that they took it over by marching around and blowing trumpets, they sort of forgot that. And so that began to lead them away from realizing that the victory is with God. So now the battle plan's laid out. We've talked a little bit about this. I stole my own thunder. And so God's prepared to enact it. Joshua sent the forces chosen for the ambush away, took the rest of the army before the city. Let's read verses 11 through 13, because now in verses 11 through 13, there's a restatement of the original plan that was talked about in the beginning. And all the fighting men who were with him and drew near. Let me stop right here. All right, so here's a quiz. I told you, Jake, there was going to be a test. So we're going to read verses 11 through 13, and I want you to tell me what's different from the original plan, okay? Jake, you ready? Here we go. And all the fighting men who were with him and drew near before the city and encamped on the north side of Ai with a ravine between them and Ai. He took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the rest of the city. So they stationed the forces, the main encampment that was north of the city and its rear guard west of the city, but Joshua spent that night in the valley. All right. So 5,000 men between Bethel and Ai. Then it says that he stationed the forces. The main encampment was north of the city, north of Ai. and its rear guard was west of the city. All right. What's different? What's different in that passage that I just read from the words that we read at the very beginning about God's plan? 30,000 and the 5,000. I'll write down, Jim gets a prize later on. That's very good. And so there is a difference here. And there's skeptics, as skeptics do, that say, all right, here's an inaccuracy. Originally it was 30,000. This whole scripture is about following God's plan. What about the 5,000? And so, I don't know exactly how to tell you the answer to this, but I'll give you some theories. Others of you may know of some other things, but some believe that the smaller number of 5,000 might have been the lead members of the ambush party. So it's possible that the 5,000 were a leading group of the group of 30,000. That's a possibility. Some think that there may have been two ambush groups, one of 5,000, one of 30,000. That's a possibility. And so, in conjunction with that, if there was, 5,000 and 30,000, maybe Joshua intended to send Ai up in smoke with one ambush group and to sort of protect Ai from Bethel and anybody coming out of Bethel with the other group. And so those are some possibilities. Drew, you got anything else?
Well, as I was reading it, I wondered if this, all he said is put them behind Ai.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the map, west and north, could that have been behind Ai?
Right. So there was a group there he talked about. Yeah.
The east or south or something.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, even in that verse, there was a mention that, there was a group that was, there's 5,000, and he put them between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. He stationed the forces. The main encampment was north of the city, rear guard west of the city. It's one of those things that we don't know exactly. It's sort of interesting to talk about. It's also the fact, the part where they stationed them between Bethel and Ai also could have been another military tactic, right? That we're not going to allow the people to flow out of Bethel. I mean, the whole idea of this was to clear out Ai. And so 5,000 may have been established there. The rest of the ambush group goes into Ai, sets it ablaze, and, then they have Ai cut off from Bethel and people coming in from Bethel. Because remember, all of these surrounding places, they know what's up and they know what's next. And so they wouldn't be unwilling to come and try to help their neighbors because they know that, the conquering is coming their way next.
God did not tell them exactly how to break out those 30,000. He just said,
Yeah.
You said 30,000 out as an ambush. He didn't say keep them all in one group.
Sure.
Separate them in different groups. He did with more detail.
Right.
With the 5,000 as to how to break it.
Right. What to do with those 5,000. That's right. So maybe there was just, absolutely. So if you didn't hear what Jim said, the 5,000 were given a specific instruction. They very well may have been 5,000 out of the 30,000, which would even support the kind of idea that says the 5,000, they hold Bethel at bay, and the 25,000 come in and they do the pilfering and destruction in Jericho. So we don't know the answer to that. It's always interesting to point these things out so that we can consider them and think about them. But regardless, the most important thing of all is the trap is set for Ai. That's the most important thing. All right, so verses 14 through 21, the attack. So the battle played out exactly as Joshua suggested. Let's read verses 14. And as soon as the king of Ai saw this, he and all his people, the men of the city, hurried and went out to the appointed place toward the Arabah to meet Israel in battle. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. So instead of engaging the The opposing army, as we've talked about earlier, Joshua and all of Israel reacted in a surprising way in verse 15. And Joshua and all Israel pretended to be beaten before them and fled in the direction of the wilderness. So, sensing the opportunity to destroy once again the invading army of Israelites, the soldiers from Ai, also joined by men from Bethel, it says, pursued the fleeing Israelites. And verse 17 says, not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. They left the city open and pursued Israel. Worked just as planned. That's the way the Lord's plans work, just as planned. At this point, the Lord instructed Joshua in verse 18, stretch out the javelin that's in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand. Joshua did just like he was told, and the men in the ambush rose quickly out of their place. As soon as he had stretched out his hand, they ran and entered the city and captured it. And they hurried to set the city on fire in verse 19. So this part about the stretching out of the javelin, that may or may not have been sort of a prearranged sign. Sounds like, probably is that was the sign for the ambush to begin. Joshua holds out his javelin, and they move into the city. But regardless, the text makes it clear that the plan came from the Lord. And it also makes it clear that at this point, and I'm talking about specifically in verse 19. Let's see, 19. Then the Lord said to Joshua, stretch out the javelin that's in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand. This, more than any other part, this is the time that the Lord takes direct control of the battle. For the Lord will what are the words there? Will give it into your hand. For I will give it into your hand. Now, God offers up the battle. He offers up Ai. Joshua did just like he was told. And so now the complete battle plan is executed. Verse 20. When the men of Ai looked back, behold, the smoke of the city went up to heaven. They had no power to flee this way or that. For the people who fled to the wilderness turned back against the pursuers. And when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had captured the city and that the smoke of the city went up, then they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. So it worked just like they had planned. The attack worked picture perfect. So the third section of our lesson is about the victory, and we'll talk about this, and hopefully just a couple of applications we'll have a chance to talk about. The strategy worked as anticipated. The men of Ai were trapped between the forces led by Joshua and those that had burned the city. And then both Israelite groups focused their attention on the enemy. Joshua's forces stopped retreating. They turned around and began to fight. The men from the ambush also closed in on the forces of Ai. And so the subsequent victory was overwhelming, and Israel completely destroyed the soldiers of Ai. According to verse 23, only the king of Ai was spared, but his fate was also sealed. Verse 29 tells us about the end of the king. And he being Joshua, hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. And at sunset, Joshua commanded, and they took his body down from the tree and threw it at the entrance of the gate of the city and raised over it a great heap of stones, which stands there to this day. So after the enemy was destroyed, Ai was reduced to rubble in the same way that Jericho was. And verse 24 says, when Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the open wilderness where they pursued them, and all of them to the very last had fallen by the edge of the sword, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it down with the edge of the sword. They came back, so they had already burned the city. They came out, they defeated the enemy, they went back, and you just think about complete destruction. And once again, when you think about this victory, there's the importance of the way that it was so complete. Everyone was killed. The king was killed. The city was burned. The city was leveled. They hang the king up to show the victory. They bury him under a pile of stones. I mean, what else can you do to reflect complete annihilation? And that's so important because it's turning around from that defeat and showing the power of God when we follow him, when we follow his word and the victory that he can provide. And that certainly applies to us today when we think about the victory that we have through Jesus. We read about something that happened different from Jericho. We've talked about all the similarities, but in verse 27, we see a difference. Only the livestock and the spoil of that city Israel took as their plunder, according to the word of the Lord that he commanded Joshua. So there was precedent for this, for the people taking the plunder, them taking the livestock, and them taking the goods from the city, the things that were of value. And so if you think about, we really didn't study about this, but if you go back to Deuteronomy 2 and the defeat of King Sihon, it says this, and we captured all his cities at that time and devoted to destruction every city, men, women, and children. We left no survivors. Only the livestock we took as spoil for ourselves with the plunder of the cities that we capture. Now, doesn't that show you just how needless the sin of Achan was? Achan was greedy. He went for something that was in Jericho. In the past, they were allowed to take the goods for themselves. In the future, the very next time, going to the city where they experienced the defeat because of Achan's sin, they were allowed to take those goods and keep them for themselves. God is not one who wants us to be destitute or impoverished because of him. He takes care of his people, but he also wants to be obeyed, and he also wants things devoted to him. And so when God is recognized and obeyed, he gives to his people. And covetousness consumes people when they lose sight of the generosity and the provision and the goodness of God, and that's what happened to Achan. Just a couple of applications right quick. So it would be easy to attribute the victory over Ai to Israel's ability to execute a well-arranged battle plan. We've talked about this all morning, right? This is a great plan. This was fun for me to study. I mean, just, the interesting aspect of how all of this battle took place. We don't get this with every battle that occurs in Scripture. And so it's just very interesting to see the strategy here and how all of this works together. But if they started attributing this to themselves, that would have been a mistake. Israel didn't conquer Ai because of an ingenious scheme. They conquered Ai because they followed the Lord's plan. We never need to get to the point, and this is the application for us. We never need to get to the point where we think our success depends more on our own planning than on the ability for God to help. We spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of hours here at Ashville Road trying to come up with the things that we can do to help spread the gospel, to help people understand that we're here and that we're a place that can help them, most of all, go to heaven, but a place that can love them. And we do all these things, and we do them all with the right attitude and the right heart. But then sometimes, at least speaking for Tim, one of the things I forget to do at that point is we've planned it all out. And just like this battle plan, it's like, all right, guys, let's go. And we forget to give it to the Lord. And there's just nothing more important than that we have to remember that 1 Corinthians 3:6 tells us God gives the increase. We can have the greatest plan in the world, and we can think we execute it textbook. And maybe it doesn't work right then, or at least the way that we want it to work. We want it to work, and we want to see souls being saved right then. And, maybe it's a seed that's planted that might germinate 10 years from now. Or maybe we just need to keep trying, and God's going to give the increase on another day. But the human nature part of this is we get frustrated, and we think that plan's bad. And then we maybe we're tempted to stop planning and stop trying. We need to realize that just like this battle, we've got a plan, and planning is good, and going and executing that plan's good, but then we need to turn it over to God. God's the one who's going to give the increase. He's going to do it in His way, in His time. The only thing that we need to make sure that we always continue to do is plant seed. One of the things that God said that, He never said that He was going to give the increase if we didn't do some planting and watering. And so if we'll do those things, He'll take care of His part. He'll do it in His time, in His way, in the perfect way, just like He did for the people here. We just need to do our part and give God's part to God, and we'll win the victory in the end. At the end of this battle, there were a couple of memorials that were constructed, one with the ruins of Ai, one over the grave of Ai's king. We never need to forget about going back and learning from these things. And those memorials were set up. Remember, we've talked about already the need for memorials. That allowed them to come back and be strengthened by seeing that memorial that represented the victory that was given by God. And we always need to think about the memorials that we have. And we've talked in previous lessons about the Lord's Supper every Sunday and the memorial that it gives us to think about the greatest sacrifice ever made. And we think about being able to see people baptized into Christ, and that can be a memorial for us to help us remember what God's done in our lives as well. And so just never, every time you read about a memorial in the Bible, think about those memorials that mean important things to us today. All right, that's it. Next week we're going to go to Joshua chapter 9 and talk about Gibeon's treaty.